There is a strange peace in a small Lisbon cafe, the kind of peace that only unfamiliarity can bring. It is not the silence of emptiness, but the silence of a conversation whispered in a language you don't understand. Portuguese flows past your ears like a melody, and you become an invisible observer. And then a voice rises, loud, clear, and full of friendliness, tearing through that space. "Well, I just don't get why it's so hard to find a good old-fashioned American breakfast around here." The American man, probably in his 30s, in a t-shirt and shorts, says to his companion as if he were in a diner in Ohio, where the air is always thick with the smell of bacon and weak coffee. No one in the cafe reacts, perhaps because no one really understood, or perhaps they are too accustomed to this phenomenon. He speaks as if he is on his home turf, and in his mind, perhaps the entire world is his home turf. It's just that the away team doesn't know the rules. That moment is a perfect miniature of a deep-seated belief that friendliness and English are a universal passport. Americans call it freedom. But somehow everything comes with a rule. And the biggest unwritten rule, perhaps, is that everyone must understand you, must nod, must smile, must respond to the "how are you," even though it doesn't expect a real answer, just an echo of social courtesy. In America, that exchange happens in a blink. "How are you?" "Good, you?" "Good." And it's done. A social ritual has been completed. Everyone feels safe to continue their day. When you take that rule outside the borders of the U.S., it becomes a mobile paradox. You are free to speak, but you are not free to be understood. You are free to ask, but you are not free to receive the answer you envisioned. It is a cognitive shock, a gentle one, like touching your hand to an invisible pane of glass, separating you from the rest of the world. You can still see everything, but you cannot touch its true essence. They don't do it out of meanness. Not at all. They do it because of a deep-seated, almost instinctive belief that friendliness is a global language, that a smile and an open voice can erase all differences. Look at America, a continent built by immigrants where everything is designed to reduce friction. The system of measurement? Use whichever, feet or meters, pounds or kilos, as long as everyone in the hardware store understands each other and can assemble the shelf. Cuisine? Anything goes as long as there is a menu in English and the description is enough for you to picture your lunch. They live in an ecosystem where English is the air, is the water. And when you breathe something your whole life, you start to think it's the only oxygen. You don't think about it. You simply exist by it. I once witnessed an American woman holding a croissant ask a server in Paris if they had any of those little bread things with the sugar on top. She was trying to describe a croissant to the very person who made it. She didn't mean any offense. In her world, a lack of vocabulary was just a minor obstacle to be overcome with enthusiasm and hand gestures. She drew the shape of the pastry in the air, effort evident on her face. The server looked at her not with anger, but with a tired patience, as if he were witnessing a repeating natural phenomenon, like the tides or the sunrise. He nodded, pointed to the pastry in her hand, and said, clearly and slowly, "Croissant." It was a moment of minor universal adjustment. One side provided the energy, the other provided the information. There, the American learned that sometimes knowing the name of something is more important than possessing it. Respecting something enough to learn what to call it is the first step to truly entering a culture. But that patience is not always available. There is a subtle difference between trying to communicate and expecting the communication to revolve around you. The latter is the core of the issue. It comes from a culture where convenience is king. In America, you can have anything you want the way you want it, and you can have it right now. From a burger customized with 12 different sauces to a taxi appearing within 3 minutes with just a tap on your phone. Language, by that logic, must follow the same principle. If the world doesn't talk to you in your language, then perhaps the world needs to speak louder or slower or with more hand gestures. It is not arrogance, though it can look like it. It is a systematic naivety. A belief that every complex system, from public transport to conversations, can be simplified into basic steps as long as you are friendly enough. Friendliness is the master key, and then you step into a train station in Tokyo. Everything is orderly, quiet, and terrifyingly efficient. Straight lines, soft announcements, and streams of people moving like orderly rivers. You try to ask for directions and people avoid your gaze. Not because they don't want to help, but because in their complex and subtle system, a stranger speaking loudly, breaking the sacred public quiet, is a disruptive act. Your friendliness in that context is no longer a lubricant. It becomes sand in the gears. You stand there, with your smile and the only vocabulary you have, and feel invisible in a completely new way. You are not being ignored. You are simply not part of the equation. You are a redundant variable in a problem already solved. That is when the invisible pane of glass is no longer transparent. It begins to reflect you, and you realize that perhaps the problem is not the outside world, but your approach to it. It is the first moment of awakening, however small. And then that train finally arrives, or the bus, or the ferry. In America, on time often means late but with confidence. You drive up, wave an apology, and things move on. You have a story to tell, a reason to give. Sorry, traffic, or sorry, alarm clock. That explanation, however simple, is part of the social transaction. It is a verbal bribe to regain forgiveness. But when an American stands on a platform in Switzerland and sees the clock jump with merciless precision, they experience a slight bewilderment. How do they do it? How can an entire system operate without room for delay, for apologies, for small talk like, sorry I'm late, the traffic was awful today? Here, time is not a suggestion. It is a promise, and the lack of room for small talk around delays makes the American realize something. There are cultures that value efficiency more than explanation. They value the result more than the process. This is where the underlying belief about language begins to crack. Because language, for many Americans, is not just for conveying information, it is for managing emotions. It is the cushion between harsh truths. I'm sorry I'm late doesn't just announce an event. It is an invitation for the other person to reply, oh, that's okay, I just got here too. It is a social dance, an exchange to make both parties feel at ease. But in many other parts of the world, language is less expressive and more functional. Words have weight. They are like numbers in an equation. If you say you will arrive at 9, and you arrive at 9, then nothing more needs to be said. The silence then is not awkwardness. It is respect for what has been accomplished. Everything has gone according to plan, and words now would be superfluous. Superfluity, in a highly optimized society, is almost a sin. When an American tries to make small talk in Germany, silence suddenly becomes the loudest sound in the room. They will stand in an elevator and feel compelled to talk about the weather. It's cold today, huh? Or in a doctor's waiting room, they will try to comment on the magazine. In their head, they are doing a good thing. They are easing an invisible tension they perceive. They are pouring social oil onto silent gears. But for the German in that elevator, there is no tension to ease. There is only a shared space, and people are sharing it quietly, respecting each other's privacy. The American's act of talking, therefore, is not a greeting. It is an intrusion. It is like walking into a library and starting to sing. You might have a lovely voice, but you have completely misunderstood the space. You are imposing your rules on a territory whose laws you haven't learned. And the reaction you get is not hostility, but confusion. They don't understand why you feel the need to speak. This difference is deeply rooted in how each culture constructs its reality. In America, reality is something constructed through social interaction. You talk to affirm your existence, to tell the world that I am here and I am friendly and I want to connect. Reality is a potluck dinner where everyone brings a verbal dish to share. In many European countries, reality is pre-existing. It is solid, built over centuries of history and tradition. You don't need to speak to affirm it. You just need to exist within it, respecting the existing structures. Silence is not a void to be filled. It is the default state, the blank canvas against which truly important events can stand out. So, when Americans bring their reality construction tools, small talk, smiles, to a place where reality has long been solidly built, They are like a carpenter bringing a hammer into a porcelain exhibition. They don't mean to break anything. They just don't understand why their tools don't fit and why people are looking at them with such wary eyes. And then you have the situations in marketplaces where haggling is part of the transaction. An American, with their endearing directness, will ask the price and upon hearing a number will say, "But on Amazon it's cheaper." They say it with a smile, thinking they are engaging in an interesting exchange, a market comparison between two colleagues. But for the vendor, that is not a conversation. It is a negotiation. And in negotiation, language is used strategically, not for socializing. Mentioning Amazon is not an interesting fact. It is a card, an implied threat. The American once again feels confused. Why did they get tense? Why did the vendor's smile fade? I was just talking. It's because they are speaking two different languages, even if both are using English. One side speaks the language of connection, the other speaks the language of transaction. And when those two languages collide, no dictionary can save you. You need to understand the implicit grammar of the game. So, where does this journey ultimately lead us? It does not lead to Americans stopping speaking English or the world needing to cater to them. Rather, it leads to a simpler truth, almost a small philosophy. There is a vast difference between being heard and being listened to. When an American speaks English loudly abroad, they are certainly heard. Their sound travels through the air, hitting the eardrums of those around them. It is a physical event. But being listened to, truly understanding the meaning, context, and implication behind those words, and receiving a response with depth, is a completely different story. It requires participation from both sides, a willingness to step into the other's worldview, a genuine curiosity instead of a mere expectation. It is the difference between broadcasting and dialogue. Perhaps the issue is not that Americans think everyone speaks English. It's that they think everyone thinks in English. They believe their logic is universal, that their friendliness is easily understood, and that silence is a problem to be solved. They carry a map of the world drawn with American concepts, and are surprised when the actual terrain doesn't match the map. But the world is vaster and more complex than that. In a pub in Ireland, silence can be empathy, a wordless sharing between friends. In an office in Japan, it can be respect for another's thinking space. In a piazza in Italy, it is nearly impossible, but that is a completely different sound. A chaotic sound where even if you don't understand the words, you still feel the rhythm, the passion, and the flow of life. Silence, like sound, has 1,000 shades. So the next time you see an American trying with all sincerity to ask a question in English in a place where that language is not the default, look closer. You are not just seeing a tourist. You are seeing a product of a culture that taught them that speaking up at any time is better than silence, that their existence is confirmed through interaction. You are seeing a person holding the only key they've ever known and being surprised that not all locks are the same. And in that surprise, if they are lucky, a small door will open. The door of genuine curiosity. Not, "Why don't you understand me?" but, "Oh, so what world do you live in?" There is a beauty in that moment, a beauty of collision. It is funny, yes. It can make us smile. But it also contains a small truth about being human. We all carry our own cultural toolboxes, and we only realize they are not universal when we try to open a strange door. Americans simply have a very particular set of tools, a set polished by optimism, convenience, and an unshakable belief in the power of the spoken word. And sometimes it is the failure of those very tools that teaches them the most. It teaches them about humility, about listening with your eyes, about reading a room not by its sound, but by its silence. In the end, perhaps the lesson is not that Americans need to learn more languages. It is that we all need to learn the language of silence. We need to understand that not everything needs to be put into words, and not every silence is an invitation to fill it. When an American leaves America, they are not just discovering new lands. They are discovering the blank spots on their own map of communication. And in those blank spots, in those pauses, they may find something more valuable than the ability to be understood. It is the ability to observe, to listen, and ultimately, to understand that sometimes the most meaningful thing is not what is spoken, but what is felt in a shared stillness. It could be the admiration of a landscape, the connection in a glance, or the peace of simply existing without having to prove anything. Perhaps Americans are not afraid of silence. Perhaps they just haven't truly met it. They haven't been in a space where silence is not the absence of sound, but the presence of something else. Respect, contemplation, or simply comfort without the need for words. And when they do meet it, when they truly experience it, not as a lack but as a gift, that is when the invisible pane of glass truly dissolves. It is no longer us and them. It is no longer the speaker and the listener. It is just people, coexisting in a vast world, where sometimes what connects us is not a common language, but a shared acknowledgement of the things we cannot put into words. And in that silent moment, we might, just might, understand each other more than any words ever could.